My relationship with Rolex is complicated. A lot of watch people dismiss the brand for various reasons, like for instance they're boring, endlessly copied, overpriced, but mainly impossible to attain without groveling to a dealer or getting fleeced by various people that somehow buy at retail and immediately sell at crazy markups. On one hand, I think the brand is a victim of its own success, meaning they make beautifully made, mostly tour watches that were always an upmarket choice of watch, but were never intended to be so scarce that unscrupulous people build whole careers around insane markups, and not to mention not being able to walk down the street without risking getting robbed just for daring to wear one in public. On the other hand, the long and interesting history of the brand, the excellent build quality and perfectly made movements is not something any watch fan can or should dismiss. That said, Rolex could do more to stop black market sales, and dare I suggest having a company-sanctioned waitlist that would allow you to wait for your preferred model if you want to obtain one at retail price. Ultimately, what we want to see is more of these pieces worn on wrists, marks and all, and not locked up in a safe as an investment. With that in mind, I have something as rare as a genuinely fun Rolex to talk about today. My friend John is an old hand at Rolex watches. He owns a number of them, and interestingly, this is one of his favorites. Say hello to the updated Air-King reference 126900. Perhaps like me, you are now wondering if this is a design that came out of a Swiss Christmas party after a few too many drinks, but that's not the case. At least as far as I know. Stay with me and let's get to know this piece. Even if you're now very annoyed about me daring to talk about Rolex in such a blasphemous fashion, do please consider a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and thanks for staying with me on this slightly different take on the brand. There's absolutely no denying that the first time you hold a modern Rolex, and actually to a slightly lesser extent its sister company Tudor, it just feels special. The steel is softer, the curves are curvier, and the whole package oozes quality. That's no different here, but what is different is this dial, so let's start with that. I would like to think that if a micro brand released this design, they'd be criticized endlessly over what could be seen as a messy, unfocused, and plain weird layout. But with a little bit of background, it makes sense. Rolex made a dial for a land speed race car called the SSC Bloodhound, and this is an almost exact copy of that dial. So all of a sudden, it becomes far more interesting and even a little exciting. What we got is the classic Explorer layout of 3, 6 and 9, with minute markers in between. Above the 6th position we had the Air-King model name and old typeface almost shoehorned in to continue the legacy of that model, which previously had a very plain and austere look. Underneath we had the superlative chronometer text, which has always sounded almost childish to me. Like, if a kid had to come up with a large number along the lines of infinity plus a billion. But it does in fact specify that a range of checks have taken place to ensure that movement performs to the level that you are most definitely paying for. Another unusual detail is the logo and crown, which are coloured in green and gold, much like the clocks you might have seen at the tennis or other Rolex sponsored events. It adds something special in my opinion to the dial and ensures that surprisingly, and especially after some time on the wrist, the look comes together. Covering the dial is sapphire glass, and we have a high polished bezel which will definitely pick up scratches and will look even better for it, I think. Speaking of wrist, this is a very easy to wear watch. At 40mm diameter and only 11.8mm thick with 21mm lug width, this will fit a lot of wrists out there, and like all Rolex watches I've ever tried on, it just blends into your wrist perfectly. The crown is very easy to manipulate with just the right amount of surface area to grip outside the crown guards. As you would imagine, it is signed with the Rolex crown. The crown guards is another example of the magic steel that Rolex uses. It's quite sharp and pronounced in its design, but every corner and edge is silky smooth. This smoothness extends to the case and bracelet also. The sides of the case are polished, but the muscular shoulders, lugs, and the entire bracelet is an all-brushed affair. Again, this encourages you to wear this watch every day, since you won't be worried endlessly about scratching shiny surfaces, other than the bezel of course. It's widely recognized that Rolex makes some of, if not the best bracelets in the world. We've got the brushed bracelet as mentioned, and some fun details on the buckle. This is not a glide lock system, but rather what Rolex describes as the Easy Link Comfort Extension Link. This is a small link that folds in on itself to immediately give you a 5mm longer or shorter bracelet to help you as your wrist changes over a day. It's easy to use, and whilst not quite as versatile as the glide lock you get on the Submariner for instance, it's still a clever approach. The so-called Oyster Lock folding clasp has a prominent Rolex logo, which one could imagine might take some damage over time since it is rather prominent on top of the foldover. But again, everything is brushed here, which to me encourages daily use, and a bit of wear and tear will only make this whole arrangement look even better. Behind the standard Rolex approach to case backs, being all brushed and no details whatsoever, ticks the Caliber 3230. This is a completely in-house movement that has various patterns ensuring resistance to shocks, magnetic fields, and importantly also offers an impressive 70-hour power reserve. Much like all modern Rolex movements, servicing is recommended every 10 years, which is worth taking into account when investing in your new watch. Most other movements are recommended to be serviced every 5 years, and since those services are rarely cheap, a Rolex could be a long-term decent investment. Rolex Lume is usually quite impressive. It lasts long, and these days is typically their own proprietary Chromalight blue. The Air-King gets lumed hands. The 3, 6 and 9, and also the triangle at the 12 position is also lumed. It's a pretty unique look in the dark. Every time I handle a Rolex, I'm reminded of how beautiful they are, and how annoying it is that they've become such a symbol of wealth and showing off that wealth. I sat next to an older gentleman on a plane once that had an old Submariner strapped to his wrist, beaten and worn and just so beautiful. These watches are made to be worn in all situations, loved and possibly even passed on as heirlooms with those scars inflicted by every generation. This Air-King is so unique and fun. The look is not everyone's cup of tea, but I can tell you now, that is definitely a watch I'd love to own. It doesn't scream luxury to the casual observer, which again is a great reason to own one if you're more somebody that appreciates the craftsmanship inside and out, rather than just owning a status symbol. Rolex do make plenty of silly things, like the completely over-the-top rose gold Submariner, which is as ridiculous as it is absolutely stunning. I've handled and filmed one, and they are incredibly beautiful, but surely the vast majority are destined to be safe queens, which is a little depressing. This Air-King is not a safe king or queen. It's made to be worn, loved, and will stand up to abuse. And if you like the unusual dial design, I couldn't recommend it more, whether it's your first Rolex or first luxury watch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.